This is Hope for Your Pelvic Floor, the podcast where we stop managing women's symptoms and start making sense of their bodies. I'm Claire Sparrow, Pilates educator and pelvic health specialist, best-selling author, and here we talk honestly about what women are told, what the evidence actually says, and how real change happens. Welcome back to another episode of Hope for Your Pelvic Floor. It's great to be here with you again. And today we're going to talk about weight bearing. I know I feel like we've done this before, but there is so much conversation happening every day. It's in the media, social media. It is in my studio every day. The membership clients are talking to me. Teachers are talking to me about how confusing it all is. The information that's out there about bone density, must do weight-bearing exercise. And it's just become a bit like doing pelvic floor exercises. It's this kind of magical thing that we just get told we must do weight-bearing. What does that even mean? And what about if we've got a pelvic organ prolapse or we've got incontinence or we don't really know what weight-bearing even means anyway? It's like there's this secret code out there that we should all just know automatically what it means. I had a great conversation with a client last week about the time of life that she's at. She's retired, she's living her best life, she's grannying and just having a great life. And she was reminding me that her generation, they weren't having HRT. They weren't told to do weight-bearing exercise or any kind of emphasis on that. And it really got me to thinking about, when did this all of a sudden become a thing? And what does it mean? And how do we take this information that is out there, make sense of us, especially if we're also living with some sort of pelvic floor dysfunction, or we just want to take care of our pelvic floor while we're doing these things? So it sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole, I'm not going to lie, into the research and the kind of history of all of this. So I thought I would start a little bit today with that backstory of where it all came from, and then a little bit about what some key research actually says and how we can translate that into our everyday life. Because I want to demystify all of this and kind of break down some of the barriers and the myths and just, it's just irritating. It's irritated me, this whole thing. And I think we just need basic information. How does it apply to us? So hopefully today I'm going to cut through a bit of that with you. So what I discovered in this whole kind of inquiry and rabbit hole that I went down is that we didn't really have any kind of conversation or consideration of bone health and bone density until the 80s and 90s, which is actually not that long ago when you think about it. So this came about because of a rise of osteoporosis screening. So osteoporosis, I remember when I was wee, I had heard it being called the silent killer. This thing that women could have, predominantly women could have this and not even know they have it. They take a fall and then that's it. It's not great. So this is what I personally remember, and I'm sure that there's some of you listening that probably remember the same thing. So then in that kind of discovery, we were able to do testing. It's now called DEXA scan. Some of you might have even had a DEXA scan. It became much more widely available. And before even that, so if I rewind a little bit, before even the DEXA scans were widely available and people were having them, it was just like in our lifestyle was very different. So I think about like my grandparents, for example. My grandparents all gardened. My parents gardened. They grew a lot of their own vegetables. I loved it. Like when I was growing up, like one granddad would grow certain veg, and like the one granddad was on the leeks and another granddad was on the onions and the tatties, potatoes. And then my dad would be growing beans and things like that. So we were trading the vegetables. We were all physically active. I remember doing all the work in the potting shed, pricking out and cultivating and all of these things. These were physical activities that were carrying, squatting, walking, clambering about. Lots of these everyday activities that were just weight bearing. They were bone health exercises. It's just that we didn't know and we didn't have the science to kind of support what they were. So then we get into a more sedentary life. I remember a friend of my dad's used to come and stay, and he was so inspiring. He was a businessman, and I remember bringing the first ever laptop, the first ever mobile phone, this gigantic thing. It was grey and it was absolutely massive. It really was a brick. And that was the sort of beginning of us becoming more sedentary. So from that moment on, we were moving less, doing less of those kind of squatting, carrying, just general life activities. And so our bone density has to have been affected by that. So here we go, kind of fast forward, we're getting bone density. There's more information about osteoporosis. It was a disease. So previously it was just like normal aging that wasn't really defined as a disease. And then it became, okay, actually this is a disease. And it just means porous bone. So it just means that the bone is less robust. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, more studies were done, and it was understood that it's called mechanical loading, if we load the bones, it influences the remodeling of the bones. It gives a bit of information into the bone, which then gets it to be more dense, more robust, like I said. And this is something as Pilates teachers we often learn early in our training in the anatomy, and it's called Wolff's Law, this law of remodeling. It's what our bodies are designed to do. It's magic. We're understanding more and more about the body's capabilities for remodeling with neuroplasticity and all of these things, where we thought maybe if this happened, that was it. Actually, there's a lot that we can really do. So then, of course, understanding of the remodeling of the bone, becoming more dense and more robust. And that then gets, like so many things, like Kegels did, it gets shrunk down into a public-facing message, which became bones need weight-bearing exercise. Full stop. That was it. There was no explanation, no real understanding of what weight bearing means. Then we get into the 2000s and it becomes all very prescriptive and narrowing to just like weight bearing. And then we get in the kind of media and social media side of things, where it becomes an interpretation by whoever it is out there speaking. It sort of morphs into a different idea, or lots of different ideas of what weight bearing means. So we get lifting heavy weights, we get impact exercise, we get you have to go to the gym and do gym-based exercise. And actually, there's absolutely no nuance or specificity in that, especially for women who've got pelvic organ prolapse. And I know I've done a whole episode on this before, like other considerations, but this is kind going back to where has this all come from? And it's just like been Chinese whispers. This like, it started off with, yes, Wolff's Law. It's a fact. That is what happens. And then there's no specificity. It's just gotten narrow instead of specific. So the idea is definitely sound. So it's important we understand that yes, we do need weight bearing, but that it's the delivery, what's happening, the messages out there in the world that have gotten a little bit loose and a bit kind of like it's fallen apart, really. So I want to now explain, okay, what does weight bearing actually mean? What does that mean to you? So like baseline, technically speaking, weight bearing equals your skeleton supporting load against gravity. So basically supporting you and supporting you doing stuff in the world. Mind-blowing, isn't it? That's it. It's not lifting barbells, there's no jumping, there's no suffering. It's actually a much clearer way of thinking about it. So this includes exactly what I said before, what I remember my granny and granddad and my parents and me doing: standing, walking, stair climbing, getting up and down the stairs, sit to stand, getting off a chair, getting back down on a chair, carrying the shopping, pushing the shopping trolley, gardening, resistance through things like TheraBands. You know, these bands, every time you go to physio, you come away with a band. Brilliant. They are so good. It also includes your own body weight. So that might be using your hands to push out of the chair rather than your legs to push out of the chair a few times. It could be getting onto the floor, getting off the floor. It's also slow, controlled movement. It's whole body coordination, where your body's got time to transmit the messages of whatever that load, that activity is, rather than just dumping weight onto your body willy-nilly and without the time for your body to. It's like processing. You know, your body has to process the information coming in to be able to manage that and for it to be of benefit. Otherwise, it might just miss the point altogether, and it might even affect, if you've got pelvic organ prolapse, if you're not transmitting the message through your body in a balanced way, it might just create pressure in your pelvic floor because it's not happened in that systematic way. So the good news I want you to hear from that is that it doesn't mean high impact exercise. It doesn't mean heavy lifting. It doesn't mean that ghastly gym culture. Maybe you like the gym. I like the gym. You know, I go to the gym, I do fixed resistance, put my earbuds in, I listen to an audiobook and I tune into myself and nothing that's going on around me, so I can feel the slow, controlled way that I want to lift the weights. It also doesn't mean no pain, no gain. That's so outdated and just, you know, we need to delete it out of our vocabulary altogether. It means that we're not going to be bracing or bearing down, which I know if you have prolapse, you are not wanting to do that. You are afraid. You just need to avoid that. So we know we can actually do activities that will load your bone but won't create that downward pressure into your pelvic floor. It also doesn't mean that you should ignore your pelvic floor symptoms like prolapse just for the sake of your bone density exercise. Actually, it can all work together in harmony and not sacrifice one for the other. I think that's really important for you to recognize. And you can go back and listen to the other episodes where I talk about this, because I think it is just such a mixed message out there for women to do weightlifting, bear weight, do all of that stuff. And also you've got a prolapse, so don't lift weight. You know, where do we go with that? And there's a lot that you actually really can do. So one of the things I wanted to also add in, because I don't think I've seen or heard or read really in many places publicly about some of the things that get missed. So I want you to know that your bones, you know, they respond really well to some things, but they also don't respond well to other things. And we're not really told that, are we? You know what? Who's telling us that, you know, our bones aren't going to respond well to fear, to threat? And you might feel fearful and threatened walking into the gym. So it's not a great place to start if we're in that situation. It also doesn't respond well to like bracing, like that gripping that we might do because we're in fear or because we think we need to protect ourselves. So that excessive bracing has the opposite effect on the bone than we actually need. We need the pull and push on the bone for it to do the remodeling, and that bracing stops that from happening. Also, if you're not distributing the load through your body well, then that's not going to be helpful for your bones. It's not going to they're not going to respond as well. And also disconnected movement, something like resting your arm on a thing and doing just a bicep curl is not going to be as effective as doing something that's a little bit more integrated and working with your whole body. So what does your bones, what does it respond to? Your bones are going to respond best to variation. So not just doing the same thing over and over and over again, challenging it in different ways. And with that comes the direction of the load. If you're always just like doing a bicep curly type movement and it doesn't ever spiral or reach or go in a different direction, you're only ever challenging the remodeling in one or in simple ways and in the same ways. It also responds really well to varying pace. So that's like the speed. So instead of always just going at the same speed, there's also a lot to be said for going slowly and giving time to that movement. Also helps to include coordination, and that might just be thinking about gardening again, that you're weeding and then you're putting it in your trunk and then you're going off somewhere else and you're doing multiple movements that require a bit of coordination. It's also really important, and I know you don't want to hear this, but it's also about consistency. We've got to keep doing it, folks. We're in this body for life. It needs us to support it for life. So it does need a gentle, consistent build up over time. And the big thing for me, certainly, is that it's about distribution throughout the whole body. This understanding that if you push or pull something with your hands, that load, that thing, that feedback has to travel all the way through your body, including through your pelvis. If you're walking, if you're squatting, if you're doing anything with your lower body, it has to distribute from your feet all the way up through your legs, through your pelvis, through your torso and beyond. It's a whole body event, which is where whole body pelvic health is so key. The bones, this idea of anything in the body, in fact, working alone. Nothing works alone in the body. All of the systems are interconnected and supported. It's what creates homeostasis. We need it to be that way. It's so important that we think of the bone density support that we want to offer ourselves as a whole body event. That's a lot, isn't it? I just hope that by sharing this, it helps you maybe give yourself a little bit of slack, because I hear the dialogue out there with the women that I work with and speak with. It is very similar to the pelvic floor story. I know I need to do it, but I don't know how, or I feel like I should know how, but I don't know who to ask. I think I'm doing it right, but I'm not. It's all of the same sorts of stories. So instead of asking, what weight bearing am I doing? Is it enough? I think a better question to reframe this conversation around weight bearing, especially as it pertains to whole body pelvic health, is maybe is my body experiencing meaningful, well-distributed, and that's so key, well-distributed load that it can respond to safely? Is there any strain happening in your body, in your pelvic floor, for example? Could we rein in some way, alter the orientation to gravity, lay on your back, come onto all fours, stand against the wall? Is there a way that you can adjust so that the load is distributed well and that your body can really respond safely and appropriately to that? And I bet you it can if you start asking those questions. And I know that for many women, especially those of you with prolapse or incontinence and pain, the answer is likely to be yes, I can do that. I can distribute load through my body, and I can do that without dashing to the gym or going for some boot camp gym program situation. You can do a lot of things without that kind of activity that we seem to associate. It's out there in the media all the time, and so we associate our bone building movements with down the gym or similar kinds of things. And sometimes the most supportive or the most bone supportive thing you can do is actually slow down, organize, and allow the force to travel through you rather than crashing into one area like your pelvic floor. And I think that there can be an association that if you slow down, it's not as meaningful, or maybe you can't do as many repetitions, so it's not as meaningful. And actually, it's giving your body, your nervous system, the time to process and distribute more evenly. And we talk about this, I teach as an educator, the Pilates teachers that are coming through as the next generation. And as a Polestar Pilates educator in particular, we talk about the distribution of movement. So if we have even, equal, balanced distribution of movement, automatically we know that there will be even distribution of the forces coming in. So then we're less susceptible to injury. We're more capable of strengthening. We're more capable of being coordinated and agile. So it's really important for our whole health, not just the bone health, that we slow down and allow ourselves to distribute in that way. And it does a few specific things that are important for the bone density. So if you're increasing the time that you're under the tension, so let's use the bicep curl. It's not a great one, but just because I think you can associate with that. If I am slowly straightening my arm from the bicep curl, the bone cells, the good stuff in there that's going to be responding to it, the Wolff's Law that we mentioned at the beginning. Slow controlled means that you're under that tension for longer. So it means that it's long enough for the cells that are maybe a bit sleepy, a bit dormant, to wakey and notice and then start doing their job. So if we can take it a little bit slower, or hold even in the bicep curl, maybe that's going to give the cells the time that they need to wake up and do their job. And like I already said, going slow really does help you to take the transmission of the force through your body, feet, legs, pelvis, spine. You've got to think about the journey that force, that energy is coming through, so that it doesn't just get dumped into one joint. If your knees are aching, maybe your knees are taking all of the load and the effort and it needs to be passed on up the body. Maybe your pelvic floor feels heavy every time you've been to the gym. Maybe that's because it's taking all that load, and we need to slow it down, lighten the weight, and do it so that it transmits all the way through that journey at the body. The other thing that goes back to what I mentioned before is that it will reduce your bracing, that protective mode that we get into. And I totally get it. I understand that feeling. I remember feeling like my whole body shriveled in when I got my diagnosis of prolapse. I was there, I was with you. But actually, when we do more slow movement, it will help you to reduce that bracing, because it will stop you from holding your breath as much. You're not as likely to bear down in your pelvic floor. It's going to stop the pelvic floor from gripping. It's going to allow it to lengthen. It's really, really important that we are thinking this way and not just taking this blanket information, we must do weight-bearing activity. And of course, we need to think about the nervous system and how it needs to be calm, and slower movement is going to be calm. And when it is calm, it will help you to be able to make lasting change. If we're in that stress state, which I've said many times before, it's very difficult for your body to restore and heal. And so this is so important, especially those of you that do have prolapse. If you've got chronic pelvic pain, if you're hypermobile, menopause, need I say more? We really need to be in a calm nervous system to help us to remodel. And I also thought, well, what else might you consider or ask or wonder about this? And so I went diving into the research, and I read like 6 papers, all like peer-reviewed posh papers. And it's fascinating because when you really read it and you're not just reading the headlines, it actually is quite nuanced. And I think the nuance gets lost in translation, because out there in the world, what we hear is high impact, heavy loads to improve bone density, and then conclude that anything else that we might do is useless or not going to be bone density building. And of course it is. We already started the conversation today talking about, my granny and that all doing bone density building activity, but we just didn't know that it was. Then we all became sedentary and we have to think about movement. This is so important to understand, that everything else is not useless. Everything is helpful. So the main thing that comes out of, a whole bunch of different research papers is that bone adapts to the strain and the magnitude and the rate, not the style. So it's not a one size fits all. Slow resistance training can maintain and improve your bone densities, especially in perimenopause and postmenopause. Shows that slow controlled resistance, moderate loads, and progressive intent, that you're really concentrating and building your skill and control of the movement, maybe progressing a little bit in the load, but it's not relying upon that. This is going to be so effective, and it's in the research, they all state that it can be as effective as higher impact approaches. So it's not one or the other, or one is good and one is bad. We just have to know that consistency beats intensity, and safety is so important, because then you're going to adhere to it. So short bits of exercise, repeated regularly, outperform the big sporadic, like once a week going to HIIT training or whatever it might be. So actually doing little and often might be the way to go forwards. Have a TheraBand on the back of the bathroom door, and every time you go to the bathroom, you do a set of exercises with your arms, pulling it, doing different things that allow you to integrate it more easily into your day. Wow, it's a lot of information. I hope that by sharing that I've taken note of the research, that actually none of these conclude that slow or low impact loading is pointless. They actually conclude that appropriate strain applied consistently is very effective, that gives you permission to look at weight bearing in a completely different way than you have done before. And I think we should do that through the whole body pelvic health lens to wrap it up today, so that you've got very specific ways to reframe this when you're considering your pelvic health whilst doing bone density building exercise. Starting with that traditional thought, can you load the bones? Well, whole body pelvic health would say, can the body receive the load and distribute it safely? That's the different question that we need to ask. And that's what we do in whole body pelvic health. We bring balanced movement back throughout your body. So whether it's lifting weight or gardening, your body has already learned how to distribute load instead of putting all the pressure in one area like your pelvic floor. So from that pelvic health perspective, when you're weight bearing, let's consider the direction. So the direction of the force, the effort coming at your body. Is it traveling up through the legs? Is it traveling through the arms? Or is it collapsing? Are you feeling pressure into the pelvic floor? And if that's happening, then how can you change that direction so that it is not happening? Can you change it to maybe having all points in contact with the floor, for example? Maybe it's about the breath. That one again. I talk about breath all the time, but it's important. You might be holding your breath, and maybe that's causing downward pressure and it's not helping you. Or maybe you're holding your breath and it is helping you. Or maybe you're using your breath out on the effort of the movement that you're doing or the load that you're experiencing, and that might be helping you. So really think about the breath and what it is that you're doing and how the breath can help you. Then what about your pelvic floor's behavior? What's it up to these days? How's it behaving? Is it responsive? Is it being elastic in the movement? Or are you gripping, bracing, or like I said before, bearing down? If you are doing any of those things, what can you change about the movement you're doing to actually reduce that? And then, of course, the idea is, can you notice the force traveling through, transmitting, like we said, all the way through your body and not bypassing your pelvis, but it's coming through in a supportive way? So these are such simple questions and considerations to ask yourself. And then what about some movements that you can integrate into your everyday life that are going to be bone density but pelvic health friendly exercises? I said it before, a slow sit to stand, using your exhale to get up to standing. Heel raises, even standing on one leg. If you could stand on one leg and then do a heel raise, we're going even further. So making sure maybe you're holding on to the sink and you're lifting and lowering, doing something with a little bit of support so it's well organized and good alignment. What about split stance work with controlled transfer? So like stepping one foot forward, then stepping it back, stepping it forward, stepping it back, then taking different directions. Then if you're carrying, can you think of your deportment? Can you carry the bags of shopping, one in each hand, evenly with an upright spine, rather than letting the shopping bags bring you forward? What about, like I said before, get a resistance band. I'm sure you've got one tucked away in a drawer somewhere. Just pull it out and do some pulling with it. You can do bicep curls, you can do dumb waiters. There's all sorts of fun things you can do with a band. But I just recorded a new class for our membership with the resistance band. And it was a lot of fun to do, even although I kept thinking I was going to ping myself with the giant elastic band. But anyway, lots of fun to be had with that. And then walking. I know it sounds so boring, but actually I walk in a bit of a game with myself. So I walk to work most days and I do like different speeds. I do a little bit of like dodging and weaving. So a bit like my dog, when we go for a dog walk, we always think that he has walked twice as far as us because he's always weaving side to side, getting all the good sniffs. So I think about that change of direction, that ability to transfer the load as you go in from one direction to the other. Sometimes I'll go through the park so that I've got to walk down through the grass where it's lumpy and bumpy and it's not even terrain, and then I have to work a little bit harder, a little bit differently, and respond to that different load. And none of these things require going to the gym. They don't need any big impact. There'll be no pain involved, and they most certainly won't sacrifice your pelvic floor and your pelvic health. And, you know, I don't want us to feel like we have to sacrifice anything. You know, slow loading movements, working in a more considered way, it's not a compromise. Doing the high impact, going to do HIIT class and all of these things, that's compromising your pelvic floor. I believe we can do a lot of really valuable bone density building movements that doesn't require a compromise to our pelvic health. And for many people, many women, I know you're probably listening thinking, wow, this is actually the missing link. This is what I needed to hear. And that's why I wanted to share all of this information with you today, that where we've come from, that it was really not that long ago, like 3 decades of information, and we still are actually going a little bit in the wrong direction because of the headlines that we hear rather than the actual facts that are relevant to us. So I really hope that's been helpful for you to hear that and feel supported, and that you don't have to go to the gym. I think that's my big thing. I hear so much from women, the idea of going to the gym is just, and it puts you off doing something, and there's always something you can do. So if this episode shifted how you think about your body, that conversation continues inside our Whole Body Pelvic Health membership, where I teach you how to apply this work in real life, gently, progressively, and without fear. You'll find the link in the show notes below. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Hope for Your Pelvic Floor. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it's this: you're not broken, you're not behind, and you're not alone. There is hope for your pelvic floor. I'll see you next time.